Why is open source so important in software development, but especially in artificial intelligence? Today on Trusting AI, Unlocking AI's Black Box, I speak to Ibrahim Haddad, Vice President of Strategic Programs at the Linux Foundation, where he leads the LFAI Foundation to support open source innovation in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. Dr. Haddad has previously served as Vice President of R&D and Head of the Open Source Division at Samsung Electronics, where he established the Global Open Source Division and launched R&D collaboration projects with universities and other organizations. Thank you so much for being here with me, Ibrahim. It's a pleasure to speak to you today. And first, I would love to start off by learning more about your experience in the Linux Foundation and your involvement in Trusted AI.
Thank you for having me and for this Q&A. So I'm Ibrahim Haddad, the Executive Director of LFAI Foundation, which is an umbrella foundation under the Linux Foundation. And our goal is to support and accelerate open source development in the domain of AI, machine learning, and deep learning. As far as my Linux Foundation experience, there's actually a very interesting story because this is the third time I worked for the Linux Foundation. So I worked for the Linux Foundation in the early 2000s, then the early 2010 for 4 years, and then again I rejoined the foundation end of 2018. So you can tell that it's an organization that I personally love to work with and love its mission. And I keep, like in the Godfather movie, you have this, I try to go away and they keep on pulling me back in. So I keep on kind of, I do my service at the Linux Foundation and I go somewhere else and then I miss it and I come back and so on. So it's really a great organization, especially for those who really love what open source software is about and love the kind of the really enormous number of initiatives that the Linux Foundation is embarking in and to be part of that. So my experience has been just phenomenal being part of the LF.
How about your involvement in Trusted AI and basically your partnership with IBM? How have you been involved with Trusted AI?
LFAI or LFAI Foundation, we have a number of committees, and one of them was the Trusted AI Committee. And as a member-driven organization, we try to go towards areas that our members are interested in investing in and driving for results. So Trusted and Responsible AI was one of these areas, and in the summer of 2019, there was a consensus within the foundation members that this is an area that we would like to invest time and efforts and gain from the characteristics of open source that can bring openness and transparency in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. So basically, at a high level, nobody would want to use a product that has AI infused in it or a service that has AI infused in it if they don't trust it, right? So what can we do to provide that trust, to provide fairness, to make sure that the models or the data is not biased and, et cetera. So out of that thinking and the consensus across the members, we created the Trusted AI Committee, which IBM is one of its members, and also one of the co-chairs is Animesh Singh, who's one of the co-chairs of the committee. So we're about a year, almost exactly a year, maybe a month into a year of being in existence, and already we've seen a lot of output from the committee in terms of guidelines and principles, but most importantly also tooling that's becoming available as a foundation project that can be used as a venue for us to experiment and to codify a lot of the kind of quote-unquote theoretical work that is happening on the principle and the guidelines level, so that we can take these and implement them and make them code as part of the tools and the libraries that people can participate in its development, but also use it and adopt it. So I'm personally, and in a very transparent way, I'm not a kind of a trusted AI expert or responsible, in that domain. However, my involvement is focused on making sure that everybody working in that committee have the full support of the foundation and have everything they need so they can be productive in driving results in what they want to achieve within that committee and within the community of trusted.
So I know that open source, and I've read several of your articles, and know that you've written quite a few books. And open source is a huge part of trusted AI. Can you explain more about the disadvantages and advantages to having open source in software and specifically in artificial intelligence?
There are a lot of advantages to open source, and these have been repeatedly been called out for over 2 decades now in terms of time to market, the ability to leverage engineering resources, and the ability to kind of change the code, access it, modify it to your own specific needs, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you go back to open source literature dating, from the early, probably, the mid 90s, and then the early 2000s, and the early 2000s is when IBM decided to invest $1 billion in Linux, and this was a huge wave, created a huge wave. And then in 2011, I think they announced investing another $1 billion in open source cloud. So there are a lot of advantages to open source, and all of these actually apply to the domain of AI. However, there are some really specific characteristics that lend themselves to the domain of AI more than they do to other domains. Okay, and these are basically the concept of fairness. Okay, so if you are looking at how these algorithms run and are they fair, is there any bias in them, and things like that. Open source and transparency really is a major benefit in the space. We need to be able to have certain methods that will allow us to detect and mitigate bias in whether it's data sets or models, and with the transparency coming from open source and how the open development happened and so on, this is a huge benefit. Another benefit that is a unique benefit to AI from an open source perspective is in relation to the concept of robustness, which is basically, do we have methods that allow us to detect any kind of alteration or tampering with data sets and models? And that includes alteration from adversarial attacks and others. And of course, similarly to what I mentioned in terms of fairness, open source lends a lot of benefits from the transparency and open development to this area. There are other areas that are also unique in terms of benefits to AI. Those include, for example, explainability. Do we have methods and software programs that allow us to audit and verify and allow us to enhance the understandability and interoperability of roles in a given AI model? The outcome versus the decision, the recommendation. Are we able to explain how this model works, and is it working consistently as it should be every single time? And another concept is lineage, which are basically different methods that ensures provenance of data or data sets, and that very specifically in the AI models, including the ability to reproduce the same results. And of course, if you look at all these 4 different benefits, fairness, robustness, explainability, and lineage, under them, we need to have open data. We need to have some open methods that allow us to clean, sort data, tag them, track the provenance, and have a very open governance structure to allow us to do all of these things. And with respect to all of that, openness and transparency and availability to everybody and having access to everybody to go and participate in the process. These are really huge benefits that are coming from open source to the domain of AI.
Oh wow. Oh wow. So there's a lot of applications. Would you say there's a specific algorithm, AI algorithm, that open source is most suitable for?
There are a lot of use cases. I wouldn't want to go into kind of specific deployment methods, but I think as a general statement, I think having an open development and following the open source development methodology for developing AI systems, libraries, tools. And of course, when we talk about AI, it's kind of the larger umbrella and under which there are, there's natural language processing, there's models, there's data, machine learning, deep learning, reinforcement learning, there's 15 different subdomains. And I think the open source development model and the methodology are really the best thing that happened to software since we ever had software, period. And I'm not saying that because I work for an open source foundation. I think, I was a practitioner. I started my career as a software developer over 20 years ago. And just seeing the benefits of developing in the open and deploying open systems is far more superior in terms of innovation than developing closed systems. So if you want to think of it from a different perspective, think of, if you are working in a company and you have access to 20 engineers within your team trying to develop a certain feature or certain product versus the ability to go and benefit from thousands of developers who put a lot of thought and effort into building different libraries that you can deploy and use. So, we don't have within the company or any given company, you don't have the ability to go and hire all these people in the world, all the smart people. So there has to be a way to access their talent and skills and use it in helping you build what you're planning to build. And that way is called open source. So, and the same concept.
And so you mentioned that you started out as a software developer. I would love to just learn more about that, and also specifically how you think trusted AI can be incorporated into higher education, because I know in top, universities, colleges, we want to somehow incorporate a level of fairness and teach students that, algorithms, especially in artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning courses, data science, that fairness is just as important, and the ethical implications of these algorithms. So how do you believe trusted AI can be incorporated into academia?
So we were talking about, Beirut just before we started the actual Q&A. So I actually left Lebanon, Beirut in '98 to pursue graduate studies in computer science. So I actually have a PhD in computer science. And after finishing my first year as a PhD candidate, I passed the qualifier exam. I got my first job as a developer at Ericsson Research. And, from there, I was brought in based on some papers I published about building scalable systems using Linux and open source software. Okay, and that's 23 years ago. So my journey was open source. Even started, as a paid developer, right, in the 1999, but even before that, years before, when I was in school, and one of my professors, who was a professor at CMU, came to my American university here in Lebanon, and he threw at us some floppies and he said, "This is what you're going to do in your homework." So, and there are really thousands of stories like that. And this is just, it's very similar to how many people experienced, starting with Linux, right? And open source in general. So, and of course, through 20 to 25 years of evolution, or, in terms of, personal career, right? I love the concept of open source development. I love the concept that, I can be sitting on my desk in Montreal, talking to people in New Zealand, talking to people in Europe, and, getting help from somebody in Africa and somebody from China replying to me with it was just really fantastic, especially coming from a small country. And, I never knew somebody beyond my, tiny geographical city, right? So, it was really something fantastic. to experience. So that's kind of at a personal level. So for the other part of your question in relation to academia and incorporating trusted AI in different programs. So if I want to take a step back, there are two things I'd like to mention on this step, in relation to this topic. The first one is that if you look across, maybe about 180 governments across the globe, or 180 countries, plus or minus, there are at least 40 to 50 countries that have established formal national AI policy, or national AI strategic program, or different countries call them differently, but basically it's at a national level where countries realize the importance of AI and set up certain program or programs to support the internal development within the country of this type of competence, to encourage academia to incorporate classes and courses on this topic, and to provide facilities in terms of grants and loans to startup companies, and etc. So there are really a number of things that are being done at a country level, and even some companies went further, where they have appointed a chief ethic officer. So actually, if you go Google, there are actually some cabinet ministers who have that title now in few different countries. So you have a kind of the COO of AI in China, chief ethics, focused on the ethics side, and Dubai have something like that. The UAE have something like that, based in Dubai and many other places. So that's a kind of one part of the kind of equation we work with. The other one is that you go one level down, and then you reach the academic institutions, the universities, technical institutions, R&D labs that belong to governmental agencies across all these different countries, and all of these have gone from either having nothing specific to AI beyond just general course on AI as a graduate studies and so on, to today having a full curriculum, right, based on a lot of the open source tooling that is available now, that is being used as classroom tools, where students studying for their undergrad or grad studies, they're using these dozens and hundreds of open source tools, libraries, framework for their experimental work and their research and so on. So today, I think at the university level, and even some countries have gone a lot further than that, into establishing and requiring that their high school students have to go through specific courses as part of their high school that are focused on AI in general, and of course using open source tooling for this. So if we go 25 plus years ago, when I was in college, and we were a Microsoft kind of university, where you have all the Microsoft. Microsoft provides all these different developer tools to the university, and then in my case, during the second year of university, we had the new professors coming from CMU to taking over the department, and we switched to Linux. But even today, there's a lot of influence from vendors providing their developer kits and so on. But so there's that shift that is happening by itself. So I don't think we need really to do a lot, as it's happening, and it's already in effect. And there are universities where they have graduating classes already that are kind of AI specific. So, and this is very encouraging to relate it to trust, in that there has to be some education. Not just from how to create AI as graduate student in computer science, right? There has to be education for everybody else on what is the AI, how does it affect our life, can we trust it, what makes it is it fair, does it treat people equally, or, how can we verify that this AI has not been hacked and it's being used for purposes it wasn't created for, or there are dozens and dozens of different cases you can think of. And that education, I think, is something that we're aiming to contribute to as an Linux Foundation and LFAI by creating free courses that we are making available on the edX platform. So already today we have a course that is available. We had a few thousand people go through it. And again, it's a free course. There's really no fee to go through the course. And we are in the process of building 2 other courses so that at the end of the day, when we have 3 courses, we can bundle them together and provide them as a certificate, follow the edX platform rules. So we're trying to help in this space. And there's really a lot of participation from that effort, including IBM, our host today for this Q&A.